Good evening, people. Yes, it's me, Miss Dorina Star. I'm back with another vlog, and today's vlog is just reminding people, how I like to praise the Most High for everything I have, for giving me this opportunity to share my word, for giving me wisdom. I just want to praise the Most High, praise God, and how being spiritual is very, very much part of being a human on this planet. And especially for a woman, our job as the guardians of the faith to keep it going, to believe in God, to rely on Him when you need support, and just to remember the scriptures because it's there written for us. The Bible is just a wonderful thing. The Bible, I love it. I remember during lockdown, I would read it ferociously every day because I just felt like it just made so much sense. Like I had this, yearning just to read it page by page, research on it. And I would just spend nights just reading it and studying it. And I felt like that really helped me. And I just think those people who are going through things, I definitely advise to read the Bible because it helps you get through whatever you're going through. And you see your life, like what you've been through, written already there in the Bible for you. And it's written for us, for every human on this planet. And no matter what religion you are, just read it. Like nothing harms you from reading the Bible. Read it, understand it, because I feel like life would make more sense if people read the Bible. You don't have to be a Christian. It's a good way just to find yourself through the Bible. And people avoid the Bible because they're not Christian. Like I think the Bible's for everybody. It's a history book. It's the history of our people. And I think non-Christians would really benefit from reading the Bible and understanding, the scriptures because it's so enriching. I got this book called Holy War by Karen Armstrong. Karen Armstrong is an amazing writer. I think she's American, but the Holy War describes the Crusades during the Middle Ages. And the war, it's like a world war, like to control Jerusalem. And I just think it's very relevant. So it's by Karen Armstrong, and it says here in 1095, a long time ago, guys, with the tomb of Jesus still in the hands of the infidels and the Byzantine Empire overrun by Muslim Turks, Pope Urban II summoned Christian warriors to take up the cross and their swords against the Turks and then recover the holy city of Jerusalem from Islam. It was to be the first of the Crusades, a holy war that would focus the power of the European kingdoms against a common enemy. The Crusades became the stuff of romantic legend, but in reality they were a series of rapidly savage battles carried out in the name of Christian piety to advance the power of the Western Church. Their legacy of religious violence is felt today as the age-old conflict of Christian, Jews, Muslims persists. Karen Armstrong, the best-selling author of A History of God, enters the minds of kings and sultans, popes, saints, assassins, and simple pilgrims, skillfully presenting the Crusades from the perspective of all three traditions, and with a view towards the profound and continued influence. I feel like the whole thing with the Crusades, I feel like with the Crusades, they said the Western Church, by that time, the church in Europe had no, I don't think it's like, I don't think it's necessarily European churches coming down to Israel. I don't think it was race-based at that time, because the so-called Europeans were not white men. I don't think they were known as white. No, they weren't. I think it was a religious-based war, because I believe that I believe that the takeover of Europe had not happened then. I believe the Crusades was a religious-based battle against the Muslims, the growing Muslims. And I believe that the Muslims that were taking over Jerusalem were not the white Muslims, but the black original Muslims, because they were known as Saracens. So it was people of color, black people, the Christian blacks against the black Muslims. But then what happened was the Christian world in Western Europe was taken over by the whites. I believe that the whites that were the serfs at the time living in Europe rose up and took over the European empire, like European civilization. I believe they took over. There was like a takeover, just like how in the Muslim world, the white Turks took over the Muslim world, right? And what we have now is not the original Turks. The original Turks that were controlling Jerusalem were, I think it was the Black Turks that were the Muslim Black Turks that were taking control. But then towards later on, the white Turks, the slaves of the black Muslims, rose up, those mixed race slaves, rose up and took over the empire, just like the whites of Europe rose up and took over the black nobility of Europe. I believe that 100%. And then they enslaved the blacks in Europe, and then the white Turks enslaved the blacks of Turkey. And I believe that the crusade battle between the black Christians and the black Muslims minimized their numbers. And yeah, and then the people inside their empire took over their empire. And then what you have is white Christians, and then you have the Arab world, which is from the Turkish side. And that's why, and while all this was going on, Russia wasn't involved in all this, which is why the Russians are different. They still worship the original black Jesus, Black Mary, because the black original Christians of Europe and Ethiopia, those region, Africa, had gone and evangelized Russia, and they've kept it the same. They haven't changed. They haven't changed. Although there are whites in Russia, obviously, they have not been indoctrinated by the so-called Western church. They've always been separate. So that's my take on this. So this is a really interesting book. And it just, you see that now. So the present conflict. So it talks about the present conflict. This is what Karen Armstrong says. Jews and Arabs seek a new secular identity, the Jews. On May 14, 1948, in the Tel Aviv Museum, David Ben-Gurion held a ceremony of the proclamation of the State of Israel. It was the end of a long struggle by dedicated Jews to give their people a new home, a new identity. Instead of being despised aliens in the diaspora threatened with persecution and extermination, they wanted Jews to be proud and strong. They would shake off the weakness of their exile and create a new type of society in the land of their fathers, which would be an example to the rest of the world. The new Jewish state had the backing of the United Nations, and within the next few days, its rights to exist was acknowledged formally by the US and the Soviet Union. Surrounding Arab states, however, refused to grant a similar recognition. They argued that for 1,000 years, Arabs had lived in Palestine and that the great powers had no right to give their land away to another people to assuage their guilt about anti-Semitism and to plant a Western-backed state in the Middle East. They vowed to annihilate the new state on May 15 when the British mandate expired. 5 Arab armies invaded Israel. It looked as though the little David would be devoured by the Arab Goliath. But the Israeli army was stronger and more efficient and was able to push back the invaders. During the hostilities and the cleaning up afterwards, some 750,000 Palestinians left their homeland and have never been allowed to return. The wandering Jew had been replaced by the wandering Palestinian, and the salvation of the state had, in true time-honored fashion of the Holy War, led to the destruction of another people. The Jews who had been persecuted for nearly 1,000 years in the Christian West had now made enemies in the East, and Arabs and Jews have been engaged in daily conflict ever since. But this had not been the original intention of the first Zionists, who had begun to work for the return of the Jews to Israel in the late 19th century. The first Zionist settlers had no particular hatred of Arabs when they left their homes in the diaspora to settle in the land of their fathers. In this, they were rather similar to the first Crusaders, who had been preoccupied with their Western visions and problems than with the hatred of Muslims. When they set off for the same land to make it their own, the first wave of Jewish settlers arrived in Palestine in 1882. The year after the Tsar Alexander III had inspired a new pogroms. Russia and Eastern Europe had a long tradition of Christian anti-Semitism, but these new pogroms were especially severe. They seemed to subside only to break out again in April 1983, when a brutal pogrom in Kishinev in Bessarabia shocked the world. Despite the anti-Semitic habit, Jews had still expected that eventually in the enlightened 20th century it would die away. Even in Russia, but the Kishinev pogrom showed that these hopes were futile. What was worse, there was a fresh outbreak of anti-Semitism in Western Europe when the Jews had long been emancipated. In countries like France and Germany, the Jews had thought that their problems were over, and many sought to assimilate with Gentile society. If they felt a lingering anti-Semitism in their Gentile neighbours, they looked forward hopefully to a new century when misguided Christian habits would be superseded by rational secularism or by a sane approach to religion. But these hopes were really shattered in France, the first European country to emancipate the Jews after the Revolution of 1789. There was a hysterical outbreak of anti-Semitism when the Jewish officer Alfred Dreyfus was wrongly convicted of treason in 1895. The same year, the anti-Semitic Karl Lueger was elected mayor of Vienna. The reasons for this renowned persecution of the Jews in Europe will be discussed in chapter 11. Now it is sufficient to say that since the Crusade, Christians have made an enemy of the Jew, just as they had made enemies of the Muslim and the Greek in the early Middle Ages, producing a series of mythical stereotypes of the Jews, which were shadow selves of Europeans, reflecting their own fears and desires in a distorted mirror image. The habit was too deeply entrenched to die away, even when Christianity seemed to be losing its sway in Europe. The European anti-Semitism of the late 19th century was a secular version of the old Christian hatred of Jews. Instead of hounding the Jews to death for their alien religion, the Jews were now persecuted because they were of an alien race. One of these anti-Semite myths should be briefly discussed here, because it had an important effect on Zionism. The late 19th century was a period of intense nationalism, and Zionism could be described as Jewish nationalism. As the new nation-states were created in Europe, people sought to create a new identity for themselves, and in so doing, they made the Jew the enemy of this national character. People who were fired with patriotism now blame the Jews for having no country of their own. In Germany, for example, there was a new cult of the Volk, the people, which linked the soul of the Germans to their land. the soul people believed were formed by the German landscape, and this meant the German spirit was alien to the city and to civilization, cultures. This led Germans to see the Jews as a central enemy of the Germans. So, oh my God, they had no landscape of their own, and so their souls could not develop naturally. And this made them deformed human beings. My God, this is deep. Further, because Jews lived and worked in the cities, they were seen as the epitome of civilization. No, they lived and worked in cities because they don't want to be around country bumpkins, racist country bumpkins. I don't blame them. The new Volksschule created a youth movement which roamed the countryside, soaking up the German soul. Naturally, Jews were not allowed to join these, even if they regarded themselves as more German than Jewish. It took over student society, and students turned the Jews out of their clubs, refused to fight a duel with a Jew because he had no honor to lose. It appeared in many important novels, essays, scientific theories, oh my God, philosophical works of the time. In this nationalistic climate, it was natural for Jews to seek a national solution for themselves, and many of the early Jewish settlers believed that only by re-establishing a physical contact with the land of their fathers could Jews discover their true selves. But Zionism appeared first not in Western Europe but in Russia, and here many of the Jews sought quite different solutions. Many of them turned to religion to give strength to bear the pogroms. Others tried to flee. Thousands poured into Western Europe, and inadvertently increased their anti-Semitism there. These refugees from Russia and Eastern Europe were different from the European Jews. Their strange clothes and manners and their archaic beliefs reinforced the conviction that the Jews were essentially other and horribly different from other people in the world. Sadly, the refugees found out they had not escaped anti-Semitism, and many of them and their children would perish in the Nazi Holocaust. Other Jews fled to the US, where some of them were very successful, but they were very much aware of anti-Semitism. And even today, when American Jewry is very strong, indeed, Jews there do not rule out the possibility of persecution. Other Russian Jews decided that more radical answers were needed, and those who had received a secular education joined the revolutionaries who were conspiring to overthrow the Tsarist regime, which had brought such suffering to their people. Some of these Jewish revolutionaries, like Leon Trotsky, Rosa Luxemburg, disassociated themselves from their people, following the example of Karl Marx himself, who wrote two frankly anti-Semitic essays. Trotsky and Luxemburg and their believed that anti-Semitism was simply the result of corrupt economic system that would disappear like a bad dream after the revolution. But some of the Jewish revolutionaries were unable to accept this. They suspected that their fellow Gentile revolutionaries were actually anti-Semites and feared that the Jews would fare as badly under communists as they would under the Tsars. In effect, they have been proved right. These secular Jews sought an entirely new solution in Zionism and began to believe that Jews would find no rest until they had a land of their own. In 1882, the year after the first pogroms, Leon Minsker wrote Auto-Emancipation, which quickly made a great impact on young secular Jews. Pinsker insisted the Jews had to acquire a country of their own if they were ever to be dignified and free. Before the pogroms, Pinsker had been an assimilationist. So that's basically assimilating and disappearing, this nonsense that they call assimilation, which I don't agree with. It's wrong. But after them, he was convinced that assimilation was impossible. A Jew would always be the other for the Gentiles. For the living, the Jew is a dead man, for the natives, an alien and a vagrant, for property holders, a beggar, for the poor, an exploiter, and a millionaire for the patriot, a man without a country. It was firmly established Gentile tradition to make Jews the epitome of all that Gentiles were not. And this meant that Jews could not live in countries ruled by the Goyim, that's the un-Jews. They had to take their destiny into their own hands and establish themselves in a country of their own, where they were not vulnerable to the passing of anti-Semitic whims of their fellow countrymen. It seemed a compelling solution, and Pinska strongly influenced a new Jewish organization formed in Krakow in 1882, which called itself the Lovers of Zion. Pinska had no decided views about where this Jewish state should be, but eventually the Lovers of Zion convinced him that it must be in Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. Although they had usually had a secular education and were not religious people, the members of the Lovers of Zion had grown up in the shtils, that all Jewish towns and villages. As children, they had sat in the synagogue and listened to the psalms and prayers, which centered around the ancient land of their fathers. Morris Samuel, who is an authority on the shtil, had clearly shown the importance of Eretz Israel. It's the book I'm reading. Half of the time, the shtil just wasn't there. It was in the Holy Land, and it was the most remote past or the most remote future in the company of the patriarchs and prophets or of the Messiah. Its festivals were geared to the Palestinian climate and calendar. It celebrated regularly the harvest in the forefathers had gathered in 100 generations ago. It prayed for the Sorhe and Malkosh, the subtropical early late rains, indifferent to the needs of its neighbors, whose prayers had a practical local schedule view. In a time of crisis, it is natural for people to look back to their roots. We have seen that this is where the Hebrews had done when they made the exodus to the Promised Land, and what the Muslims had done in 7th century Arabia. And the Lovers of Zion naturally thought of Eretz Israel when they wanted to make a new start. Because the Gentile world seemed committed to rejecting them, it was important that the Jews rise to save themselves. But many of the Lovers of Zion were not content with this theory. About 6,000 of them simply packed their bags, left their homes and families, settled in pioneering communities in Palestine. These first Zionist settlers showed others what to do, and they'd be known as the first Aliyah. Immigration. They did many mistakes, which later Zionist settlers would correct. But their courageous initiative made an indelible mark on Zionism. It was this particular faith and pragmatic activity in the pursuit of a quiet opposite idea that helped to make the state of Israel an established fact. The practical pioneering element has remained a hallmark of Zionism right up to the present day. Yet it is also true that without political validation, Zionism would never have achieved its end. The man who made Zionism a factor on the international scene was not a Russian. Theodor Herzl was a sophisticated, charismatic Viennese Jew, who at the time of the Dreyfus Affair was an established playwright and correspondent in Paris for an Austrian newspaper. Okay. For 8 years, Herzl literally worked himself to death to put Zionism and the Jewish state literally on the map. Convinced of an impending Holocaust which made a Jewish state a matter of utmost urgency, he began to meet the great statesmen of the world to interest them in the idea of a Jewish homeland, and was prepared to even consider Africa or the Sinai Peninsula as well as Palestine. He looked for allies elsewhere. He even talked to the Russian anti-Semite V.K. Vlev, the Tsar's Minister of the Interior, who had masterminded the pogroms. Wow. So this is in 1896, way back. After all, it would be his interest to get rid of the Jews. Herzl was, however, convinced that in the end, Britain would establish the Jewish state as part of her colonizing effort. England the Great, England the Free, he wrote, England with her eyes fixed on the seven seas will understand us. He was proved right, and without Herzl's political Zionism, there would have been no state of Israel. At this time, when the great powers were carving up the world between them, the support of one of them was vital. But just as crucial was Herzl's work within Zionism. In 1897, he gave the scattered Zionist groups a platform. When he convened the first Zionist Congress in Basel, and this gave the movement a vital coherence and focus. At the Congress, Herzl's own charisma aroused deep feelings. Mordecai Ben Ami, the delegate for Odessa, described the emotion when Herzl took the platform. Many eyes filled with tears, Herzl mounted the rostrum calmly. Not the Herzl I know, the one I had seen only the previous evening. Before us was the splendid figure of a son of kings with a deep and concentrated gaze, handsome, sad at one and the same time. It was not the elegant Herzl of Vienna, but a man of the house of David, risen all of a sudden from his grave in all his legendary glory. It seemed as if the dream cherished by our people for 2,000 years had come true at last, and Messiah, the son of David, was standing before us. This description is significant. The delegates at Basel had no time for religion. They felt the religious Judaism had encouraged the Jews to sit back passively and wait for the Messiah, accepting in the meantime their intolerable situation. Yet, despite this rejection of religion at almost every turn, these secular Jews expressed their Zionism in religious terms. The Zionists wanted to create a new kind of Jew, but it was essential that there should be a continuity. The new Judaism had to be rooted in the passions of the past, or it would be un-Jewish. Ben Ami was not entirely wrong to see Herzl as the Messiah. He was a Zionist Messiah and dramatically expressed in his person and dignity the Zionist principle of self-determination. Instead of abdicating their responsibility and leaving everything to God, the Zionists must take full human responsibility for their own faith and initiate their own secular salvation. But as we shall see, religion is a powerful force. Interesting. Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour hoped to enlist international Jewish support for Britain in the war against Germany, and Britain was also looking at the Middle East, hoping to found colonies there after the Great War. So this was like, okay. So this is like World War One. So they were hoping to find more colonies after World War One. There was also more complex reasons why he and his colleagues issued the important statement that would therefore be known as the Balfour Declaration on November 2nd, 1917. His Majesty's government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jews communities in Palestine, or the rights and the political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. Wiseman was disappointed. The declaration was deliberately vague about the nature of this national home. Was it to be a political state, a colony, or a Jewish reservation? Further, it spoke only of a homeland in Palestine, which could mean only a small part of the country. And there was the worrying phrase about the native inhabitants of the country, euphemistically called non-Jewish communities, as though to disguise the fact that Palestine had a huge Arab majority. But despite Weizmann's disappointment, the Balfour Declaration was crucial to the establishment of a Jewish state. In 1920, after the demise of the Ottoman Empire, Britain and France did indeed establish colonies in the Middle East, which they somewhat disingenuously called mandates or protectorates. Britain took Palestine and the mandate that was pledged to implement the Balfour Declaration. Although, as we shall see, the British mandate later had reservations about the Balfour Declaration, finding it difficult, if not possible, to put into practice without the British support at the capital moment, the Zionist enterprise would probably have failed. But in the early years of the 20th century, yet another form of Zionism had developed, which would prove to be vital. Like some of the earlier Zionist ideas we've discussed, this was also had its roots in the Jewish religion tradition. It is reminiscent of some of the early crusading ideology discussed in the later chapter, because Christianity inherited these religious passions from Judaism. We have seen that all three of the religions of historical monotheism have a strong apocalyptic theme. All believe that God will finally impose his kingdom or his justice upon the world. All three religions have also developed ideologies that we might today call socialist. Indeed, in the Jewish diaspora in the Roman Empire, the Jews had developed what could be described as the first welfare system. Jesus and Muhammad could both be described in their various ways as revolutionaries. They were on the side of the poor and oppressed and fought an unjust, corrupt establishment. Oh my God. Anyway, I opened up the Bible and then I got to Hosea chapter 1. Hosea to show God's judgment for spiritual whoredom taketh Gomer, take it Gomer, for and hath by her Jezreel. Okay. The word, so on Hosea chapter 1, it says, the word of the Lord that came unto Hosea the son of Beri, the days of Uzziah and Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel, the beginning of the word of the Lord by Hosea. And the Lord said to Hosea, go take upon thee a wife of whoredoms and the children of whoredoms, for the land has committed great whoredom, departing from thy Lord. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, which conceived, and bare him a son. And the Lord said unto him, call his name Jezreel, for yet a little while I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of the Jehu, and I will cause to seize the kingdom of the house of Israel. And it shall come to pass at that day that I will break the bow of Israel, and in the valley of Jezreel. And she conceived again, and bare a daughter. And God said unto him, call him Lo Ruhamah, for I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. But I will have mercy upon the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, by horses, nor by horsemen. Now when she had weaned Loharama, she conceived and bare a son. Then said God, call his name Luami, for ye are not my people, and I will not be your God. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, you are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living God. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together, and appoint themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Oh, God.